Hello and welcome to Mulch, with me, your host Rebecca Anning-Brown. This is a weekly podcast for flower farmers who want to build a confident flower farming practice that reflects the lifestyle that you want now and in the future. Each week I'll share conversation and tips to nurture and grow you and your flower farm. I'll open conversations that flower farmers find difficult to talk about, provide approaches that will help you to make decisions, chuckle at the idiosyncrasies of our work, and always be real and honest about my own work as a flower farmer. My goal is to help you to grow a curious, confident and grounded flower farming practice that flourishes as a business that you love and are proud to shout about. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you like what you hear, please do leave a review and share the podcast with your flower farming friends. It really does help to grow a confident and successful flower farming community. Hello and welcome to another episode of Mulch. It is Monday the 18th of March, and I had one of those wonderful moments yesterday evening. So my daughter washes her hair every Sunday afternoon usually, but sometimes evening, and then I sit with her at the kitchen table and I brush her hair and I plait it ready for school the next day. It's a really lovely thing to do with my daughter, and it's a great opportunity to chat and to talk about the week. And I realised as I was doing her hair yesterday evening that I was looking out at the garden still, and it was light. Oh, praise the Lord, it was light. And potentially, I could even say that we had sunshine yesterday. I mean, it was just such a lovely feeling. Long, light evenings are on their way back, and this brings me great joy. I hope it brings you some too. So yesterday was also the Seeds of Change workshops. It was really inspiring and encouraging working with other flower farmers and flower farmers to be as they start making their plans towards growing their businesses and their lifestyles to include more flower farming practice. It was really encouraging, and it was really brilliant to hear feedback about how the workshop had been set up and how it tailored to their needs. It was really nice to hear that I was doing something right, and I think we all need to hear that sometimes, so that was really nice. Today there's been a bit of a change of plan, so I'm really sorry that this episode is coming out late. I've heard from some of you in my Instagram stories that you look forward to the episode being there during the day, and I'm really genuinely sorry that this one is so late. So my original plan today was to do an episode on risk aversion and the flower farmer. In fact, not only was that my plan, I've written the episode and I recorded the majority of it, but it just didn't feel right. And so I stopped. And you could say that I just had a feeling in my waters that you might want to hear about this today. So today's topic is definitely more meaty than risk aversion. And also following on from yesterday's workshop for Seeds of Change, it's more personally challenging for some of you, not all of you, but for some of you this will be more personally challenging, and I hope that you find it helpful to consider without the observation of others. It's the topic that was going around and around in my head as I was driving back from the Lake District today. So please do forgive me for the lateness. It's so important to me that mulch really does add value and help you to get on and grow. And to get on and grow your flower farming practice and your decision making around and in that. So I really do try and make sure that every episode feels right to me in my waters. Now, don't read too much into that. I just mean that the episode feels right. Maybe I should stop digging this hole. So today's topic is It's really a question. Is being a flower farmer a real job? Now, the reason that this has come to mind this morning is probably manifold, but in particular, it's inspired by a number of the flower farmers that I met yesterday on the Seeds of Change workshop. Because what I saw was professional, educated, capable, mainly women, but also men, in well-paid jobs, successful careers, both with and without families, who have worked to be respected in their field and to develop a set of expertise. There was no doubt that everyone that I met yesterday is good at what they do, and it's the confidence with which they spoke and described their work and their worlds that made me feel that. So they all seemed happy, well-adjusted and grounded, and still they all wanted flower farming to be more than a side hustle for one reason or another. So the workshop was designed to talk about the very personal conversation that exists around making the transition from what you do now through a 50-50-50 balance and into a professional career in flower farming. And yet this one question didn't come up. And to me, it felt palpable, and I really should have named the elephant in the room, but I didn't. And I guess I didn't do that because it felt like a given, because flower farming is what I do. And therefore I assume that people consider it to be a job, a real job. But when you're in that transition phase, it's as relevant a question as any others about finance, business models, investment, and all of those kind of tricky places to be. So, is it? Do people actually call flower farming their work? And more importantly, if you're listening to this and thinking, ooh, that's an important question to me, could flower farming be your work? Think about it. Could flower farming be your work, your only work, your sole work, your raison d'etre? Okay, so the obvious answer to the question is yes. But as ever, I would like to delve a little bit deeper, at least kind of scratch the surface of that question. Because for most of you, the question is not really, is flower farming a real job? The question is more, given that I have a job and or a role, can flower farming become part of that? Or can I really reduce my commitment to my current role so that I can support part or all of my income by flower farming? Or your question might be, I fell into flower farming during lockdown and I love it. Can I really grow a business that pays doing something that I love? I could go on, but I think you have probably got my point. The question isn't, is flower farming a real job? It's, can flower farming be your job? So why is this even a question? I'm really curious about this, and the answers that I'm going to pose or suggest, as ever, are my view. And so you are entitled to disagree, but here are my thoughts. Over the course of this year, so far, Anthony and I have spoken to a number of you in workshops, and I'm also, obviously, in contact with lots of flower farmers as friends and colleagues through social media, on the telephone and WhatsApp, and joy of joys, literally face-to-face. It's my favourite thing to actually see people in real life. I still think like it's a treat. It strikes me that many newer generation flower farmers are not from farming backgrounds. I have to say that many are on farms with farming families that are working on diversification. But a large proportion of the people that I meet don't own land, don't have a farm or a barn or a spare polytunnel or any of those things. And they don't have that inherent body of knowledge about working the land behind them, with them and by their sides. So there's a growing number of people who have fallen in love with flower farming at some point over the past few years, and a fair few of those might well have been during lockdown when there was little else to do but garden and eat banana bread. And many of you may have started flower farming or growing flowers as a hobby. And the particular hurdles that you are facing when making these decisions around what is a real job or what can your real job potentially be relate to not your ability to grow flowers. In fact, whilst I would absolutely agree that many people will need upskilling in terms of their growing and their propagating and producing a piece of land that's productive, that's not really the challenge. The challenge isn't about the growing, and even where it is the challenge, there's lots of support out there in terms of how to grow, what to grow, and courses that tick that box. So what's the greater challenge? Well, for me, the greater challenge that I see and to a degree have experienced is one of identity. Because I see and talk to accountants, teachers, nurses, lawyers, surveyors, executives, police officers. I've met and talked to marketing strategists, parents, carers, doctors, lecturers. I see and talk to a whole load of successful people with what my friend Anna would call a capital letter job. So a capital letter job is one that you might have dressed up as a child, or that you might be dressing your own children up as. They're the ones that you see commonly in costumes like firemen, nurses, paramedics, superheroes. They're the jobs that we are encouraged in one way or another as children to head towards. They're the jobs that are easy to explain to others on the bus, at a dinner party, at a networking event. And more often than not, they are secure with a form of pension, and they have allowed us to build a lifestyle and a social network that we enjoy. And so with all of this perceived security, it's really, really, really hard to look beyond everything that we have and to dare to ask the question, could I be a flower farmer instead? So often within the podcast there's a story. So today's story is of me as a junior doctor. So as I was training, it was around the time that the NHS had introduced something called run-through training. So that was the first iteration. I'm not sure which version of that it's on at the moment, but the intention of the programme was to prevent doctors from swimming around for years and years doing endless junior doctor jobs, and to encourage and funnel doctors into a direct training path at the earliest opportunity. The reason for this was very well intentioned. So the reason was primarily to increase the population of senior doctors in hospitals and general practice and so on. What we would now call senior decision makers. And in theory, this was a brilliant idea. However, the practicality was that as doctors became consultants and senior decision makers sooner, what they lost was experience. Because whilst the historical systems may have been, or may have appeared to be, doctors swimming around aimlessly, what they were really doing, even if it was unintentional, was gathering experience and exposure and a depth to their practice. I can hear you saying, Rebecca, what has this got to do with flower farming? So, whilst on my non-stop run-through training to be a consultant in emergency medicine, I had an educational supervisor. Everybody has an educational supervisor. Mine was a wonderful woman called Roz. For any female or male ED doctor for that matter, she was and still is an absolute shining light of knowledge, experience, compassion, insight, skill. She's just the epitome of what I wanted to be. And when I was about halfway through my training, I started asking the question, would an alternative route in medicine be more appropriate for me? And that was mainly because other specialties, specifically anaesthetics and paediatrics, had tried to poach me and offer me jobs. And she said, look, Rebecca, when you're making those decisions, don't think about now and where you and your other kind of middle-y training colleagues are, because it's a hard place to be. Don't look at that. Look at where the current consultants are. Look at their skills and their experience. Look at their opportunities and their roles outside of and in association with their medical role. And use this to help you decide where you would like to be. Because ultimately, that's where you're intending to get to. It's not about the challenges of training, it's about the end result. So, for fear of upsetting people, I'm not going to name names. However, as someone with a capital letter job and a professional registration, when we started on the road to flower farming, I followed Roz's advice and I looked ahead. And I saw flower farmers charging VAT, which means that they have to have quite a significant income. And I saw flower farmers with a work-life balance that, well, I envied. I saw flower farmers with jobs that they loved and hobbies and families too. And no, this wasn't the exception rather than the rule. It's just that those guys are as modest as Roz. Like, you wouldn't know if you had an initial conversation with Roz or an in-depth conversation with Roz what she has achieved in her career, because she just wouldn't say. They're just doing the do, and they're getting on with growing and enjoying life. And when you find those people to look for and to look up to and to look ahead to, it gave me hope. So often at the end of an episode, I will share tips and advice. Instead today, what I'd like to do is to offer some questions for you to reflect on. And so make no error, I am posing these questions directly to those of you who've asked this question. Is flower farming a real job for me? Even if you haven't asked that question out loud, and it's one that's just kind of niggling away at the back of your mind. Or if you've been asked that question by friends or family and you've laughed it off or moved the conversation away. These reflection points are for you. So, number 1. If you were asked to write about your current career, how would you sum this up in 5 words? It's hard, but think about the 5 words that best describe what you do and how you feel about your work. The second one, take money out of the equation and be honest. So yes, we all need money to live. It's an important currency. It makes the world go round. But take money out of the equation. If money was a given, what are the most important things about how you work and how you live for you? The next reflection point is there a hope or a dream that only you know? If so, write it down. You don't have to tell anyone, But writing things down increases the chances of you acting on them and making them happen. Scary stuff, but who knows? Who knows where writing down the scary stuff will lead? Okay, it's Monday. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand this over to Anthony to edit in a second, and it will be out as soon as possible. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating wherever it is that you're listening. And I'll be back next week for another episode of Mulch and to talk about something related to flower farming in practice. Rebecca.
Thank you for listening to Mulch. I hope that you found it useful. To find the show notes, head back to our website where you'll find links to all the things that I've been talking about in today's episode. If you're on Instagram, you can find us at Silver Grey Foliage. I would appreciate it so much if you were able to share this episode in your Instagram stories. And if you were able to leave a review, it really will help more people to get on and grow. I'll be back with you next Monday to talk about more flower farming in practice. Rebecca.